have a two-part agenda, A and B. We'll start with Part A. But before we start, let's call the roll and establish a quorum.
Roth.
Here.
Glazer. Wynn. Here. Pan.
Here.
Okay. Part A, vote only. We're going to vote all of the items except 3. Item 1111, Department of Consumer Affairs, issue number 3, we will vote separately. We will vote separately item 7760, Department of General Services, issue number 1, Capital Outlay Central Plant. And we will pull from the vote only calendar for discussion and vote item 0690, Office of Emergency Services, issue number 1, Emergency Operations and Critical Support. So let's take the two separate vote only items first. Item 1111, Department of Consumer Affairs, issue number 3, medical cannabis. And the recommendation, staff recommendation on that is set out on page 8 of the agenda. Is there a motion?
So moved.
It's been moved. Please call the roll.
Roth.
Aye.
Glazer.
Aye.
Wynn.
No.
Pan.
Aye.
Let's take item 7760, Department of General Services, issue number 1, Capital Outlay Central Plant Capital Irrigation Project. That is set out on page 22 of the agenda. Let me just 20 of the agenda. And the staff recommendation on that is to approve as proposed.
Move that.
It's been moved. Please call the roll.
Roth.
Aye.
Glazer. Wynn.
No.
Pan.
Aye.
Let's take all remaining items on the vote only calendar with the exception of, as I indicated, 0690, issue number 1. Is there a motion?
So moved.
It's been moved. Please call the roll.
Roth.
Aye.
Glazer. Wynn.
Aye.
Pan.
Aye.
Okay. Let's take item 0690, Office of Emergency Services, issue number 1, Emergency Operations and Critical Support. Need to operate with the right agenda, right? Okay. Let's introduce ourselves for the record, starting my left to your right. Ma'am?
Hi, Nancy Ward, Chief Deputy Director, Cal OAS.
Good afternoon, Mark Gellergy, Director.
Good to see you, sir.
Rick Stoltz, Assistant Director, Calavias.
Okay. Oh, the team.
Brendan Murphy, Department of Finance.
Emma Jungworth, Department of Finance.
Thank you for coming back.
Brian Brown, LAO.
Sir. Okay, I pulled this from the vote only because I wanted to have some conversation about a couple of the items. Maybe my colleagues do too, but in particular, there's some recommendations with respect to statewide disaster programs administration. There's some recommendations with respect to law enforcement branch staffing that I'm hoping we can talk about a little bit. So, can someone review with me what the $4.9 million for statewide disaster programs is all about? And the reason I'm concerned is because it's the proposal is a dramatic haircut, I'll call it. And I'd like to know what it is we're doing with the money maybe 4.9 million is the right amount, maybe it's not.
Sir,
Am I making sense, or
Yes,
I feel
you
like
are.
I'm talking to the wall here?
No, absolutely. No, I
for
totally
your aid.
understand your question. The 4.9 in general fund is basically aligning our disaster recovery operations so that we are staffed and funded from the general fund for our state-only disaster activities and responding to state-only disasters statewide. The department has never been funded for this activity. We cost share this activity for those disasters that rise to a presidential disaster declaration, but for those events which we have much more of that are responded to and recovered for state-only events, the department takes over all of that responsibility, and we have been funding our own costs to those activities.
So how many statewide disaster programs do we have that are not also federal?
Approximately 40.
40.
And we also
40
have
active.
40 active
Right. We have-
that have not been closed out.
Yeah.
So what is that? I'm trying to understand what that means. So we have a federal and a state declaration of a disaster, and
Well,
I assume,
it could be a state. It could be a federal if it qualifies. So they don't always come together.
currently, how many of those 40 were federal disaster programs?
None. In addition to the 40
None ever?
state, none ever.
None of those 40, not the universe we're talking about, of those 40.
In addition to those state-only 40, we have an additional 14 that have risen to a presidential disaster declaration, and we get federal dollars to administer those programs.
So is there a-
We cost share to those.
I was going to say, is there a state match, and if
That's
so,
correct.
what's the
It's
match?
75-25.
So we pay 25, the feds pay 75.
That's correct, on the activity portion. We also cost share for the federal disaster declarations. Our California Disaster Assistance Act allows us to cost share the 25% non-federal share with the local governments at a 75-25.
Okay. But we still have skin in the game as a state.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we're picking up 75% of that 25% at the local level to support our local communities.
So if we were to vote this as proposed, which is to reduce the governor's proposal 4.9 million to $188,000, what does that do?
It does nothing for us. It keeps us in the same position that we're currently in basically having a non-normalized disaster recovery section that is not funded to deal with state-only disasters.
And we could assist in addressing some of the backlog.
So
with the 186.
what remains undone? What will remain undone then if you get $188,000 as opposed to 4.9 million? That's what I'm struggling with.
We can address the state-only events, the 40, the past 40, to a large extent. Anything new, we do not have general fund dollars for those operating costs.
So
The 186,000 is really for travel and logistics support for those staff that are going to be going out and working with the locals to close those disasters.
So let me try it another way. So are we going to spend $4.9 million to have staff folks remain at the ready? And then if there is a state disaster that is not also designated as a federal disaster, we can deploy them?
Currently, all of the staff's funding for their positions and their operating costs are currently now cost shared with the federal government. We've never been funded for the state-only portion of those, so we've basically been borrowing from Peter to pay Paul on the general fund side. If we don't get the general fund, we will continue to limp along trying to align our resources with whatever federal dollars come our way. And FEMA has changed their policy. It used to be that we could request reimbursement for our state managing of their program, but they have limited that to only 8 years. And when we get a disaster large enough to meet the federal threshold for a presidential disaster declaration, that means that we have in excess of $60 million and better in damaged public infrastructure that take years to rebuild and reconstruct. Sometimes because of environmental and historic permitting, but it sometimes takes years. And we are now limited to only 8 years of the federal-only disasters to fund these people.
So with the decrease in the number of federal disasters we've seen and the increase in the number of state disasters we've seen, there's no further opportunity to get federal funds to match and support the team that's there. That $4.9 million will normalize that division, that directorate of recovery staff. These are specialists that handle the recovery after disaster, to go in and deal with all the state disasters that never raised to the level of a federal disaster.
I mean, but we have a supplemental appropriation process. You know, we're doing the budget now, but when something occurs that's not planned for, agencies can come in for a supplement. Am I finance?
Well,
So if we have a disaster, help me unwind this or
So,
unravel this, because I don't understand. Are we paying for people to stand and wait until we have a new
no,
disaster?
nobody's waiting. Everybody's busy. There's disasters that go on all the time in the state that are not close to getting to be a federal disaster declaration.
This says 2 positions.
The two positions specifically in the are mitigation positions. We're not asking for any of the disaster recovery. The 2 positions are mitigation positions.
I think the piece of that is the request is not for new positions. The positions are at the department. The request is to reestablish the cost share. What is out of whack is the ratio that has been relied upon is a reliance on the federal government picking up 75% of all of the recovery staff. Excuse me. That is not, nor probably has it been for many years now, a feasible alternative because of the number of state-only disasters that these staff are asked to work on a regular basis. So as you heard, there's essentially 40 open state-only disasters. One of you guys nod if I'm getting the numbers wrong.
No, you're
and 12 open federal disasters. 14, sorry. The cost share only applies to those 14.
So how have we been paying for the state stuff?
So that's
The issue.
yeah.
Well, how have you been I mean,
We've been, because we've had.
Moving it from other parts within the department. We're trying to constantly rob Peter to pay Paul. It's not a normalized system. We have a weak link, and with the number of state disasters going up, it's only getting more complex, and it's unsustainable for the long term. So just like our responders that are going out, putting the fire out, or dealing with the floods, the recovery team is right next to them doing the recovery part to help these communities rebuild. And so, we can't, having to constantly try to find money within the department. And yes, there is deficiencies that we end up going in every year, but that's because we're really not funded overall to the degree to respond to disasters, given the number of disasters that we see in the state.
And I would also add that in the leaner years, just not too long ago, the staff at the time were told not to work on the state-only disasters because we did not have funding to supplement those activities. And so what that actually means is local governments are not getting reimbursed for the work that they're doing to rebuild their communities.
in a very timely way.
Is this money for reimbursement?
No.
It is for to pay the staff that actually go out and develop the claims and provide the reimbursement to the local communities. That's what the money is for.
Well, I apologize for turning this into a painful process, but, when you look at budget numbers and when you are in positions as we are that sit up here, you don't certainly want to be in a position of reducing a budget line item that has the word statewide disaster attached to it, unless you understand what it is you're reducing and you make a determination that it's not money well spent. Leo?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't know if this will help clarify at all, because this particular component of this larger BCP is a little bit complicated. It actually has at least 5 different components to it. So one piece, the $188,000 that you see in your agenda that's recommended for approval, is to help pay over the next 3 years the backlog of state-only disasters. So if you approve that piece, you'll be able to, the department will be able to fully fund all those state-only disasters which have expired. So they have, I believe, it's 8 years to pay off those reimbursements that allow them to catch up on that backlog. There's about $500,000 of the request that is to fund climate change and some similar related mitigation workload. And then the remaining roughly $4 million of general fund increase is to, with 3 other programs, to kind of increase general fund and reduce federal funds. So they're kind of swapping some fund sources around. And part of that has to do with, as they said, to better be able to use general fund to fund different sort of disaster-related activities, where, in their view, what they've argued is that federal funding has not been available in recent years. Now, the challenge we had in reviewing this proposal was looking at those transfers, or those, the department wasn't able to provide to us a clear explanation of where federal funding has gone down for most of these programs and where, in other cases, their actual costs have exceeded their general and federal fund total authority.
So I think I just want to clarify at least one point. So the $188,000 is actually for closing out federal disasters that are past the ability to charge money to. So
We're maximizing the
we've already run past that. So the $188,000 doesn't get us anything on the state side.
And it doesn't provide for salaries. It is, as the director said, only that travel and per diem that gets them out into the local governments.
Finish processing claims.
That's correct.
As Brian mentioned, as Elio mentioned, it is a complicated, somewhat complicated idea here. But the crux of this really boils down to roughly $3.5 million of the total, and on this portion, right? Boils down to, we have existing positions that don't have an eligible fund source to charge to anymore.
And they've just been moving money inside their,
Yes. And
without a line item.
They had a
but-
horrible deputy director of administration for a long time, and he did it.
I could tell you were a master.
He was
So-
brutal. That's all I can tell you.
He was genius.
I'll come looking for you.
And quite frankly, joking aside, by maximizing literally savings in all other areas of their budget to move to fund the disaster recovery portion is what they've been doing for years now. And is that, what we brought forward this year is a request to say, with all legitimacy, this is a process that wasn't sustainable when we started it during the bad times, and it's certainly not sustainable as we look to build a healthy recovery program long into the future. And so what you see here is a reflection, quite honestly, of about 6 years of thought since we really got into this issue. And, Mark and Nancy have been on just a few years under that, but that we've really looked at, of all the things we could do, there is more than enough work for the current positions. The workload is there. Nobody disputes that the work is there. We're really talking about how can we possibly fund these moving forward. And the department is telling you that they had a horrible deputy director who came up with a ridiculous way to do this. And now they'd like to, submit to you that there probably should be a better process.
And can I just add one thing? We talked about processing claims, but I want to be clear. When you look at the fires we just had last summer, the debris clearance operations, the putting in portable housing to put people in place, the crisis counseling, the ability to rebuild these communities like Middletown or the downtown Weed after the fire went in and burned them out, the ability to ensure that local government's budget and economy and tax base stays in place. All of those things are done by these folks in our recovery. So it's more than just going out and shuffling papers. These people are recovery specialists that that actually go in when the fire's still burning. They're not there to put the fire out. They're there to begin that process of rebuilding that community, that local government, and helping it be sustainable after the disaster ends.
Disaster logistics program.
We're shifting now, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Before I
Just to be
turn it
clear.
over to my colleagues, I'm trying to decide what to do here. Disaster logistics program, what is that?
So
Because that has nothing attached in this proposal that I see.
That was heard on the 28th and was approved at that time, is my understanding.
Okay,
but I'd be happy to explain it if you want to know what it is.
that would be good.
So, and I know if anybody knows better about logistics support to operations, your background, that's exactly what is here. You know, an army moves and is supported by logistics. So there's the first aspect of the fact that when disasters occur, we have to do commodity movement. We need to make sure that resources or commodities get placed into disaster zones, water, power, other kinds of temporary emergency housing, food supplies. So logistics does a couple of things. One, they're focused to support the responders and the needs on the long term of being able to have all the resources to fight the fight. And they're also designed to support the community with regards to emergency supplies, delivery of through a pipeline of commodities, water, power, and to integrate with the private sector to ensure that those commodities or those aircraft or those military support to civil authority all comes together. And they do that in a collaborative effort with our National Guard, our military services, our other emergency responders. So logistics, we've not had, and as Brendan was mentioning, and I mentioned when I first came to you, I have been working for the last several years to restructure OES and finally come to you with a series of a comprehensive BCP that normalizes and addresses the gaps and seams that existed within OES that made it very problematic for us to be the kind of emergency management and Homeland Security agency that's necessary for the state of California, given the kind of threats and the kind of disasters that we're seeing. Logistics was one area where we had no capability. We actually expected that we would turn to the federal government and say, you guys handle logistics for us. But we learned in Hurricane Katrina that after Katrina, you can't expect, states cannot expect the federal government to be the silver bullet solution to the needs at the state and local communities. States have to have a capacity. And that's what we built in here, albeit very minimal, because I didn't want to go way over until we can continue to get those performance metrics fully vetted, and then I could come back down the road. This begins that process of building, and we're doing it in collaboration with FEMA and with other partners.
And let me let me shift gears again, because I'd like to get a little clarity on this. With respect to regional response and readiness, the proposal was roughly 1.9 million proposed to be cut to 879,000. What will that reduction do or cause
Again,
to your agency?
these are issues Senator, about our capacity to deal with existing and evolving complexities, scopes of disasters that we're seeing in the state. We came through, like every other government entity, several years of cutbacks. And in one key area that was cut back to the detriment of leadership, of the detriment of the ability to have good coordination efforts, good preparedness efforts at that interface between the state and our local government partners, was the cutbacks in our regional operations. So this is a proposal to, again, help to normalize, get us back to a place where we can meet the minimum requirements necessary to ensure that when we have the Valley Fire, where that county was so impacted, we had to bring the entire state emergency management team in, embed into their county EOC, and run that incident for them until they could get themselves organized. In the meantime, I had incidents all throughout the region that were also happening. And so, again, we're having to rob Peter to pay Paul and moving people around. This is an issue of we have a capacity problem, we have a requirement problem, and we need to meet that by plussing up these resources. It's very, very simple. We don't have enough to get the job done. There's a huge need, and we're not meeting the need currently to where we need to be with regards to our regional. Same thing with our law and fire issues, which I'm sure we'll get into in a minute. But we're not able to get to our statutory requirements and the expectations of OES, because what happens is when the disaster happens, as you know, our constituents, our communities are expecting us to be on it. And they're on the phone with you, and you're on the phone to us. And the issue is, how are we responding in a way to protect lives and property and get these people's lives back online again?
Well, frankly, I'm not prepared to vote on this today. I'd like to, I'll let my colleagues ask questions, certainly, but I'm not prepared to take action on this. I'd like a little bit more conversation to occur, and I may participate in it myself, because I need to be a little bit more comfortable with if there are reductions in administration's proposal in some of these areas, in particular with respect to disaster coordination. I need to be a little bit more comfortable with the reduction. But having said that, colleagues, questions, anyone? No need, but you may say an opinion.
Thank you. Yeah, I share your concern, Mr. Chair, and I think that I know we had a presentation before, but I think I would like to see more of a rationale as to, and I also sense some discoordination in terms of understanding. So, for example, I heard. LAO, we heard that was federal. You're saying state. So I'm trying to, okay, which pod is going where? And I want to be sure we're all on the same page so that we're making the right decision. The drought, maybe here, we're feeling a little better here in Northern California, but it's still around. We have a lot of dead trees. We have, we still have a lot of potential for a lot of activity here in the state in terms of emergency services, and I want to be sure that we're ready for those. Whether it's here in EMS or, we don't do public health. We have Zika virus on the way, and we have other things as well. And we need to be sure our disaster folks are ready to act quickly, because it's we don't want to be playing catch up. That's usually the most expensive and most damaging of all. So, and I know we didn't even touch the fire apparatus as well, but at the same time, it's accumulative. I think around 16 million, so it's not small change either. I realize our budget's very large, but comparatively, but I just want to be sure we're in the right place so that we're ready to provide the support for all of our first responders who come out and have to tackle these problems when they show up, and be sure they have the support they need to do the job, and we can help the communities.
Any further questions, colleagues? Any public comment on this item? So I don't know the logistics of this, how we're going to work this, but I would like some more information from you all. I'm not the brightest bulb in the pack, and my light's a little dim on this particular issue, and specifically the $4.9 million issue. I need to understand that.
Okay. Senator Hayes, may I add a couple comments? I think one thing that the committee needs to ask themselves is what level of emergency management capability do you want? This is important thought process because,
We want the one that fixes the problem when it occurs.
okay, well, and I would submit to you, you may want to consider having the one that addresses the problem before it occurs to minimize the problem when it occurs. So the point is that Dr. Pan mentioned something just now that we have the Zika fire, we're not doing public health here, but I could tell you this organization has the responsibility for coordination of all crisis situations in the state. While CDPH may have the primary responsibility for the Zika, the coordination of all the assets and that integration of resources to deal with the cascading impacts of an outbreak like that gets coordinated through OES. So when we look in the last couple of years of the asymmetrical kind of and complicated kind of events, Aliso Canyon, San Bernardino terrorist attack, tree mortality, drought, and then the mainstream fires and earthquakes that we've seen, you think about the complexity of each one of those with the multiple cascading impacts. In some cases, for example, Napa could have been a lot worse, but for the fact that our office, working and coordinating with all of the other entities that have a piece of this, put in strong building codes, worked in disaster preparedness operations to minimize and reduce the potential impact of that disaster. So we actually, when you look at emergency management, you have to think about it in the context of preparedness, planning, response, recovery, and then mitigation in the cycle of us working in all of those different aspects, and definitely has to be done in a collaborative way with public, private, non-governmental, faith-based, public safety. All of that has to come together to be able to get there. So I just, to help your education or kind of a little bit, and we'll work with you with whatever we can to brief you. I just want to make sure you understand it is a very complicated and very broad set portfolio that OES has.
Well, to Senator Pan's point, there does appear to be a lack of information interchange here somewhere. There's some sort of a disconnect between committee staff and LAO and finance in terms of understanding the bones of this thing and what you have now, what you're not going to have if we approve the proposal. And I'd like to get more detail on that.
And I would like to make a correction that was, I think Brendan, no disrespect, but Brendan misspoke on the 188 that the LAO talked about. That is actually for the backlog of state-only, yes. So I just wanted to clear that.
Well, that's the kind of information.
I apologize.
He never makes mistakes. That's the kind of information that I'd like to get before we vote on this thing. And let's get to a number that is the right number that allows you to do the job that you need to do, that we need you to do, to take care of Californians around the state. And I don't think any of us on this dais are going to be the one to slash your budget and create a problem when folks really need you. So we just need to get to that number, and I need to understand what that is. So we'll figure this thing out logistically, and we'll get this thing to a vote and get you funded.
Great, thank you,
Thank you
Senator.
for taking the time to try to explain it to me. Military Department, 8940, issue number 1, work for waters.